It's Sunday, February 18th. Welcome to Breakfast Club at Temple Anshe Shalom, online this Sunday with an incredible writer, Nora Gold. Let's drop in and have a listen.
To me that it's happening in Hamilton, where I was a professor for 10 years and have all sorts of connections. And as we were talking about before everyone joined, I know all sorts of people at Anshe Sholem and think it's a wonderful community. So we're going to discuss, as Cantor Paula said, my two most recent books, which are my fourth and fifth. And the first is 18, Jewish Stories Translated from 18 Languages, which is a book that I edited. And In Sickness and in Health, Yom Kippur in a Gym, a book of two novellas that I wrote myself. And I love the fact that it is a flip book. So each one has its own cover so that people relate with equality, I guess, to both novellas. It's a wonderful concept of equality for the two books. It's already gotten two reviews, which is very reassuring for an author, a 5-star review in Reader's Favorites and a wonderful review on Friday in the Ottawa Review of Books. And each of these novellas, sometimes in a book like this, the two are connected in some way. These are two discrete novellas, and each one is like a complete book. So I'm going to divide our approximately 45 minutes into three parts, about 15 minutes on 18, and the same for In Sickness and in Health, and Yom Kippur in a Gym. And I'd like to thank you all for coming, because there's so many other things that people can be doing with a Sunday morning. So, or in the case of Rita in Israel, Sunday afternoon. I'll start with 18, Jewish Stories Translated from 18 Languages, because chronologically, that's the one that's already come out. It's, out of all of my books, the only one that I did not actually write. It's my book. I created it. It wouldn't exist without me. And I wrote the introduction. But the stories in it are written by 18 different people. So this is an interesting experience for me as a writer, especially having these two books born, so to speak, so close together. 18 is the first book of its kind in 25 years, so it's attracted quite a lot of attention. It was praised by Cynthia Ozick, Dara Horn, Alberto Manguel, among others. And it includes 18 what I consider fabulous works of fiction, by which I mean stories or novel excerpts that were originally written in 18 languages: Albanian, Croatian, Czech, Danish, French, German, Greek, Hebrew, Hungarian, Italian, Ladino, Polish, Portuguese, Romanian, Russian, Spanish, Turkish, and Yiddish. And this book grew out of the literary journal that I founded and edit, jewishfiction.net, which has published nearly 600 works of Jewish fiction that were never before published in English and that were either written in English or translated into English.
Nora, sorry to interrupt. A couple of people are saying they're having trouble hearing you. I don't have any trouble hearing you. I'm not sure if you're able to be a little louder where you are, but I do recommend that everyone up their volume as much as they can on their computer device. So Nora, let's just test that out again.
Is this better? I just turned it up really loud.
It is louder for me. Can you a show of hands? Are people hearing okay? Thumbs up. Okay, let's continue. Thank you.
That's better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm telling you about jewishfiction.net. The translated works that we've published in jewishfiction.net were originally written in 20 languages, but of course I wanted to call this book 18 because of the meaning chai in life in Jewish tradition. And the translations make up about 30% of the works in our journal. I love, of course, everything that we publish, including the stories written in English, but I've always felt that the translated works contribute something special. And over, I've heard from our readers whose first language was English, that until they started reading our journal, they had never before encountered Jewish fiction in translation, aside perhaps from Hebrew, Yiddish, or Ladino. Certainly not Turkish, Albanian, Greek, etc. And in fact, they hadn't even known that all this literature existed. And unfortunately, it turns out that this is quite typical. Because when most people hear the phrase Jewish fiction, they think only of works, people whose native language is English, they think only of works written in English, and usually, unfortunately, only American ones at that, not Canadian, British, Australian, South African, etc., much less Jewish fiction written in other languages. And I find this not only sad, but ironic, because related to Jews having lived for 2,000 years among other nations and having written in the languages of basically every country where they've ever dwelled, one of the key features of Jewish fiction is its multilingualism. So it really bothered me that people didn't know about any of this, and I decided to address this misconception about Jewish fiction by sharing some of the amazing translated works that we published in jewishfiction.net. So that's the background to how this book came to be. In addition to wanting to change how people think about Jewish fiction, I also thought or hoped that recognizing the cultural diversity of Jews would help also, and had many implications for the so-called real world. As we know, unfortunately, some people have very narrow and distorted perceptions of Jews. For example, just to give a couple of examples, that all Jews are white, which is not true, or that all Jews are rich, or anyway, richer than everyone else. Again, beliefs that are untrue and help to fuel anti-Semitism. So I would like for this book, by showcasing the diversity of Jewish fiction, to also indirectly showcase the diversity of Jews, and in this way, help to counteract these kinds of anti-Semitic stereotypes. One question at the heart of this book is, what is Jewish fiction? And the answer to this may sound obvious, but actually it's a matter of contentious debate. Hundreds of articles, books, conferences have struggled with this question, and consensus has never been reached. For most people, what is Jewish fiction is kind of a theoretical question, but for me, it's a practical one, because as the editor of jewishfiction.net, defining the parameters of Jewish fiction is essential for deciding which of the submissions we receive are eligible for publication. A couple of months ago, I had an article published in Hadassah magazine where I interviewed 7 American Jewish women authors. They insisted that they be American. That was not my choice. I wanted actually to interview women writing in many different languages. And I asked them what they thought made a story or novel Jewish. And there was no agreement at all. These 7 women completely disagreed with each other. And these are women who are well known as being Jewish fiction authors. One person said there had to be a Jewish character in the book. Another one said, no, there did not. Someone said the author had to be Jewish. Another one said, no, that wasn't necessary. There are countless definitions and beliefs about Jewish fiction. And I discuss all of this in the introduction to 18, so I'm not going to go into it here in any detail. But I'll only say that I used, for all the stories in jewishfiction.net, and also for 18, obviously, because all of the stories in 18 came from jewishfiction.net. I used the definition by Ruth Weiss, as she laid it out in her book, The Modern Jewish Canon, which is a classic. And basically, she views Jewish literature as writing that is, quote, centrally Jewish, a phrase originally coined by writer Cynthia Ozick, which to Weiss meant reflective in some way of Jewish experience, Jewish consciousness, or the Jewish condition. Of course, what it means for a work of fiction to reflect Jewish experience, consciousness, or the Jewish condition can be very complex to define. But in a sentence or two, I'll say that from my perspective, a story that is Jewish expresses Jewish identity on either a religious or cultural dimension, and it relates in a fundamental way to Jewish experience, whether in the past, present, or future. And in such fiction, the Jewishness of the work is inextricable. Unlike stories, and I've seen many of them, unlike stories that purport to be Jewish literature simply because they contain a bagel or a character with a Jewish name, with authentic Jewish fiction, you cannot extract the Jewish element of the work and still leave the story standing. So this is what we use in jewishfiction.net and in 18. So 18 was published, as you heard, 4 months ago. which was October 17th, which is just 10 days after October 7th, with the massacre in Israel. I almost canceled the book launch because I felt who could possibly celebrate anything 10 days after October 7th. It felt obscene. And then I decided to use this occasion, educationally perhaps, to share with people the ideas and also the comfort that this book could offer. I began to think about what a book can and cannot do in a time of crisis. A book cannot rescue hostages. It cannot bring the murdered back to life. It cannot heal the wounded, much as I wish it could do all of these things. And when I speak of the dead and wounded, I mean both Israeli civilians and the Palestinian civilians in Gaza who are innocent. But still, I think a book can offer us something important. We need stories to understand ourselves and to figure out how to live. And this is always true, I think, but especially in times of crisis, catastrophe, and trauma. We turn to books for help, for solace, for answers, for questions, for knowledge, for a way out or a way forward. So I turned to 18, and I found in it stories and characters of resilience, wisdom, and strength. And I decided to use my book launch to highlight, at a terrible moment in Jewish history, the resilience, wisdom, and strength of the Jewish people. And here is just one example of each. For resilience, I chose Elie Wiesel's Hostage, which was translated from French. Many people erroneously think that he's an English language writer because he was an American citizen, but he wrote in French almost all the time. In this novel excerpt, a New York Jew is taken hostage by an Islamic terrorist group. When I first accepted this novel excerpt and published it in 2012, the setting and situation seemed remote and even unlikely. I almost thought this is ridiculous kind of context for a story, a novel excerpt. But of course, who would have believed that this situation is unbearably relevant today? In this excerpt, the man who's been taken hostage copes in various ways, but it ends with him imagining a group of children demanding a story from him. And he tells them a story about a young tiger and an old lion, which to me is about the power of stories to help us survive. For wisdom, I chose the story Golem, translated from Polish. And by the way, the author, a marvelous author, Maciej Plaża, incidentally is not Jewish, and I do not believe that only Jews can write Jewish fiction, and we can discuss that later if you like. Golem is about a young woman twice widowed, and because of this, in her shtetl, her small village in Poland, she is seen as bad luck and cursed. No one wants to marry her, and mothers keep their children under their aprons and hide them from her when she walks in the market. She, sitting Shiva and mourning for her second husband, whom she really loved, discovers in this part of the excerpt that she knows the truth about herself and the world around her. And she also discovers the wisdom to survive her environment, which is hostile, and her very great loss. For strength, I chose The Rebbitzin Sense of Justice by Lily Berger, translated from Yiddish. And by the way, a whole book about Lily Berger, the first major book about her, is going to be coming out soon with U of T Press, edited by Frida Foreman and her whole group of the Toronto Yiddish translation group of women writers. So you can look for it. It's going to be fabulous. This story of Lily Berger's is about a very strong woman, a Rebbitzin, the wife of the rabbi school teacher, and her refusal to tolerate injustice. She is unwilling to stand by while the fat, rich boy in her husband's class gorges himself on the fancy foods he brought from home, as he did every single day, while the poor boy in the class goes hungry. It's a fabulous story, absolutely beautiful. So anyway, this is how I think or hope that 18 can remind us of our own resilience, wisdom, and strength, both individually and collectively in these difficult times. One last comment about 18, since we are hosted here at Anshe Sholem, regarding the theme of Jewish tradition in this book. Jewish tradition appears in many of these stories in a variety of ways, including in both a positive light and a very critical one. One story in particular is interesting to me because it combines both these elements regarding our beautiful tradition. This is The Guest by Varda Fishbane, translated from Spanish. This is a story set at a Passover Seder in 1940, and it is gorgeously written with all these beautiful details about the dishes that are served and the way the table is set, and everything sparkles. And there are great descriptions of the people around the table, including the narrator, who's a young girl, her grandfather, who presides over the Seder like a king with great, great dignity. So there's this love of our tradition and the beauty of our rituals, practices, and holidays. And then something happens at this Seder. And I won't say anything more than this because I don't want to ruin the story for those of you who haven't yet read it. No spoilers, but it is a brilliant and painful evocation of how religious tradition, when combined with patriarchy, can have devastating effects on the lives of women and girls. And even though it's set in the past over 80 years ago, it still, unfortunately, has resounding relevance today. Moving on now to In Sickness and in Health. This novella is about a woman named Lily who had epilepsy as a child, so her most cherished goal has always been to be normal, quote. By age 45, she has a, quote, normal life, including a family, friends, and an artistic career, and no one, not even her husband, knows the truth about her medical past. But now some cartoons she drew threaten to reveal her childhood secret and destroy her marriage and everything she has worked so hard to build. This is a novella about secrets, shame, invisible disabilities, and both the limits and the power of love. I think that everyone has secrets. I don't think there's any exception to this. There are things that all of us are not proud of and would rather that other people not know about. So in that sense, Lily is not very unusual. But as she discovers, there is a cost keeping these secrets. At one point in the novella, she doubts the value of the love that people have for her husband, and her closest women friends, because none of them really know her, meaning they don't really know her because they don't know her secret. And of course, they don't know her secret because she has never told it to them. As we know, there are sins of commission and sins of omission in life. And by omitting to tell anyone the full truth about herself, Lily has created an image of her life that is a lie. She rationalizes this with very excuses, why she has not told her husband or her close friends about her past. She tells herself that the topic of her epilepsy has just never come up in conversation. She tells herself she's protecting them from being upset, and so forth. She has a whole bunch of excuses. And she actually thinks she's getting away with this subterfuge until there's a crisis in her marriage. And then something in her starts to unravel, and she realizes she has a crucial choice to make. Regarding the setting of this novella, the beginning of In Sickness and in Health is set in a bedroom, more specifically in Lily's bed. She's been suffering for the past 3 years from a mysterious illness that no one can diagnose. This novella is, among other things, about illness and how one of the effects of illness is that it restricts you physically, limiting the space where you live. But also when you're sick, a bed can be a haven, a place of relaxation and safety. But when you're not well, it's also a kind of prison. Later in the story, Lily is well and returns to her job. So there are scenes in the college where she teaches art, and there's a scene in a store by a lake where she stops on the way home. But at the end, this novel returns to where it started, in her home, because ultimately this is a story about the intimate spaces in life. And in Lily's case, these spaces are her body, which sometimes supports her and sometimes fails her, and her marriage, which sometimes fails her and at other times supports her. I'm going to read to you now the first couple of pages from In Sickness and in Health. Sickness is a foreign country. You are lost there. You don't know the language, no matter how many times you've visited before. Nothing is familiar. You're alone, but a different kind of alone than usual, because when you're sick, you don't have yourself. Your own body has turned against you. It is your enemy now, and no one can fight and try to destroy their own body. So you are defenseless. Sickness is an alternate reality, its own existential state. In it, you are lost. Lost, not only like a mapless, hapless tourist, but in the sense of someone cursed, doomed, and consigned to hell. There's no hope or salvation for you. You live when you are ill in an underworld that healthy people don't even know the existence of. So there is no one, not even the most loving Orpheus, who can save you. Once a month, you are struck by a mysterious illness which transforms you from an active, busy, dynamic, productive, energetic, lively, cheerful person to a helpless body on fire, sweating, moaning, its eyes closed, lying in bed waiting passively for the fever to burn itself out. So far, it has every time, and for this you count yourself lucky. You've never died from this illness. You always recover. Though over the past 3 years, these episodes have extended longer and longer. Originally, they lasted only 2 or 3 days, then 4 or 5, then 6 or 7, and twice in the past months, they have dragged on for 8 or 9 days. You worry now that eventually these attacks of illness will continue for 10, 12, 15 days, occupying half of each month. And after that, 2/3, 3/4, 4/5, and before you know, you'll be a full-time invalid. Perry says not to think this way, to stop catastrophizing. Easy for him to say. He's not the one trapped in a burning body day after day. Be optimistic, be hopeful, he says, pointing out that so far this year, the episodes have averaged out to only 1 week per month. Only, he says. On the calendar magneted to the fridge, you violently blot out with a thick black marker all the days in that particular month that you have been sick, the lost, dead days. Each of these 7 or 9 calendar squares, if they were a frame in one of your comic books or graphic novels, would be an illustration of absolute darkness in the dead of night. At other times, you are more philosophical. Maybe losing 1 week out of 4 isn't so terrible. It almost seems reasonable since you and Perry are in a 25% tax bracket. You're accustomed to paying the Canadian government 1/4 of everything you have, so why not be required to pay as well to some higher authority, fate, or some unknown God 1/4 of your life? No one knows what's wrong with you. Not one of the doctors you've consulted has a clue. All 7 of them seem to you as medically insightful as the 7 dwarfs might have been. Thanks to the lack of a clear diagnosis, you can't get a doctor's note from any of them when you're too sick to work. So even though it's only 6 months into the school year, you've already used up all the discretionary vacation days you're entitled to annually. Your boss, Ned, the head of the fine arts department, is fed up with you being sick and warned you last month that if you miss even 1 more class, he's going to cancel your contract and find someone to replace you. I've been more than fair with you, he said. I have to be fair to the students too. Today is Saturday, your next class is Wednesday, and you have to be well by then. You have to. You can't afford to lose this job. Financially, you and Perry have 2 kids in college and a mortgage, but in another way too. Having a job means you're normal. This job of yours is a central pillar of the beautifully normal life you have painstakingly constructed, and without it, everything will come crashing down around you like a house of sticks in a storm. What if I'm not okay by Wednesday? You asked Perry anxiously this morning. That's only 4 days away. We'll manage somehow, he said reassuringly, squeezing your hand. But you didn't miss the shadow of doubt behind his eyes. It feels like 10:15 at night, but it's only 10:15 in the morning, and you have no idea how you're going to get through the next 12 hours. Perry, after leaving you your breakfast tray, went to the basement to work in his den of iniquity. No, it isn't really that. It's just his office. He's an accountant and he works out of your home. It's cheaper that way. But sometimes you wonder, what if he finds another woman, someone healthier than you, who he doesn't have to climb 2 flights of stairs for 3 times a day to bring her meals? Like his secretary Charlene, for instance, who is cheerful, young, and peppy, wears short skirts and tight sweaters, and is in her sexual prime. Harry, though tall and attractive, is not. You've heard them laughing together when you were in the living room, right above the office, and he never laughs like that with you. He's probably not doing anything wrong, and he's allowed to have a life after all, even if you at present do not. It isn't his fault that you lose a week every month to a mysterious illness, while he continues to work, play handball, and lead a full and vibrant life. It feels unfair, and you're envious. But okay, let him have his health. It's good that at least one of you is healthy, and let him be happy too, as long as he's not too happy, meaning happy with Charlene. So that gives you some sense of Lily and the nature of this novella. Now we shift gears and we move on to Yom Kippur in a Gym. Yom Kippur in a Gym is about 5 strangers in a gym during the last hour of a Yom Kippur service, and each person is struggling with a different crisis. Lucy can't accept her husband's Parkinson's diagnosis. Ira, rejected by his lover, is planning suicide. Rachel worries about losing her job. Ezra is tormented by a mistake that ruined his career. And Tom contemplates severing all contact with his sisters. Then a medical emergency unexpectedly throws these 5 people together, and in that hour, all their lives are changed in ways that they would never have believed possible. The setting for Yom Kippur in a Gym is obvious from the title. The story takes place in a gym. And many people tell me after hearing about this novella that they find its setting startling or very odd. But to me, it feels natural and even familiar because for over 2 decades, I attended high holiday services in a gym. I led part of the services, and year after year, I spent Yom Kippur surrounded by hundreds of people, sometimes over 1,000, many of whom I didn't know. Often, I found myself gazing at these strangers and wondering who they were and what they were really thinking about. Especially during the last hour of Yom Kippur, the Ne'ilah service, when, according to tradition, our fate is inscribed for the coming year. This is a unique moment spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically, our last chance before, quote, the gates close, to face ourselves, examine our flaws honestly and nakedly, and commit to changing and improving in the coming year. Or not, it's our choice. So this setting, in a way, gave birth to this novella. I never noticed until I'd written Yom Kippur in a Gym how few novels or novellas there are about Yom Kippur. When my publisher asked me to identify other books like mine for marketing purposes, I was very surprised to discover that there are not very many books of adult fiction at all about Yom Kippur. And this struck me as very strange, given that Yom Kippur is the most important day in the Jewish calendar. Interestingly, by way of contrast, there is no shortage of fiction books about Yom Kippur written for children. So I started to wonder if there's some kind of barrier affecting writers of adult Jewish fiction when it comes to Yom Kippur. You know, maybe they feel it's too big a topic to take on. Maybe it's too serious and too heavy. Perhaps they fear that Yom Kippur will hang like an albatross around their necks, weighing them down with somberness and eliminating the possibility of any fun or humor in their books. And let me say that Yom Kippur in a Gym is full of humor and fun. It is. Maybe these writers are unconsciously superstitious and worry that what they write about Yom Kippur might cross the line into sacrilege, and this could come back to bite them at their next Yom Kippur. In any case, I find it very surprising that there isn't more adult fiction on this topic, because for me, Yom Kippur contains everything: drama, suspense, passion, hope, love, hate, frailty, strength, truth, lies, fear of transformation, and longing for transformation. So for me, what more could a writer ask for? Whatever the reason that authors avoid writing about this holy day, Yom Kippur in a Gym is eliciting a very different reaction from people than any of my previous books. Never have I been asked so frequently or so insistently about the setting and theme of a book that I wrote. In addition to learning that Yom Kippur seems to be an avoided topic for writers of adult fiction, I learned from writing Yom Kippur in a Gym how I really see Yom Kippur. Until I'd finished writing it, I didn't know that I see Yom Kippur, the day itself, as having a kind of magical power. Yet this comes through very clearly in this novella, where Yom Kippur is not just part of the background setting, but an active player and force in the book. Yom Kippur, with its constant prayers, words, and music, is the fulcrum that propels the action in this novella, tipping the seesaw lives of these 5 characters just as the gates are closing. In this book, Yom Kippur is a character in its own right, and one that is just as important as the other 5. Maybe as you read Yom Kippur in a Gym, for those of you who attend Yom Kippur services, it will remind you of what you think about when you're in shul on Yom Kippur. Now I'm going to read to you from the beginning of the book. And if there's time, something from the middle. I think we have time. The gym is filling up with people in their finest, fanciest clothes. No, they have not come to work out in their suits, ties, and dresses. They're here for Yom Kippur. They seat themselves gingerly on uncomfortable folding chairs and glance up warily at the basketball hoops hanging over their heads like swords of Damocles on the day of judgment. Higher yet, at the space just below the ceiling, where the women's section might be in one of those old shuls, a running track silently circles the room. Down on the floor, there are the squares, circles, and parabolas of the basketball court, markings that define the parameters of players' movements, the way Jewish law does for Jewish lives. Most people here look chastened, weary, and pale. Some faces are as dead white as the concrete walls of the gym, since they've been fasting for 24 hours. Others betray themselves as non-fasters by their rosy cheeks, bouncy gait, and the absence of any visible exhaustion or strain. But faster or non-faster, or faster and slower, all the individuals in this stifling room, 800 souls packed like sardines, a random catch of the Jewish people, are together in the same boat. According to tradition, shortly after sundown tonight, in just 1.5 hours, the gates of heaven will close for another year, and the fates of everyone here will be sealed. Some will live, some will die. Some will prosper, some will fail. There will be successes, and there will be suffering. And all you can do to try and tip the balance in your own favor is pray, admit your mistakes, and commit to do better, and donate to the needy. The rest is out of your hands. A serious business, to be sure. But still, you have to admit there is something incongruous, even comical, about holding a Yom Kippur service in a gym. It's a situation that invites jokes, injecting levity into what otherwise would be an unrelievedly sober, somber day. When the rabbi here, who is not actually a rabbi, only a third-year rabbinical student, told his classmates about the high holiday gig he'd gotten for himself, they, rabbis being no crueler than anyone else, but also no kinder, could not restrain their laughter. High holidays in a gym? They'd been invited to lead, or anyway assist at, services in a dignified, pompous shuls with plush seats. This skinny, mousy classmate of theirs was going to officiate in a basketball court. Jokes, told mostly but not all behind his back, were perhaps inevitable. For instance, how is what you do in a gym similar to what you do at a High Holy Day service? Answers. In both cases, the exercise feels like a marathon, an endurance test. It's hard, demanding work, but worth the effort. Sometimes you're operating alone. Other times you're part of a team, collectivity. Your performance is evaluated by a judge or referee, either in this world or the one above, and so on. None of these parallels, however, occurred to the people who organized the High Holy Day services in the gym. They were just being practical. As members of a modest downtown shul, short on cash but long on passion for social action, they wanted to offer High Holy Day services to all the unaffiliated, lost, and lonely Jews in downtown Toronto. These three adjectives merged in their minds. They assumed that if you were not affiliated with a shul, you must be lost and lonely. So one of the board members persuaded his sister-in-law, who worked at the downtown Jewish Community Center, to let the shul use its gym free of charge for these services. Then the board collected a little money to hire a rabbinical student, and hoping to recoup at least part of this cost, decided to charge all attendees, pay what you can. The rabbinical student, whom almost everyone present assumes is a real ordained rabbi, is winding up mincha, the afternoon service. The only sound you can hear, other than a baby's intermittent crying, is the rabbi singing the prayers. The congregants, now on their third and last day with this rabbi, find him satisfactory. Young, friendly, nervous, and eager to please, he's the sort of young man whose thin cheeks, more than one maternal older woman in the congregation, has the impulse to pinch or fatten up. He is dressed in traditional garb, of course, the white robe symbolizing a shroud, reminding everyone present of the fleeting nature of their lives and the inevitability of their deaths. His voice as he sings is reedy, thin, and strained. He has done okay so far, leading the services last night and almost all of today, but he knows that Ne'ilah, the closing service of Yom Kippur, which starts soon, will be his real test. His strength is ebbing, and he wonders if he'll be able to make it to the end without losing his voice altogether. Yom Kippur finishes tonight at 7:57. Now it's 6:30, so there's almost an hour and a half to go. Already some people are gazing up longingly at the big old-fashioned clock on the wall, as if willing the stern black hands to turn more quickly, so Yom Kippur will be over and they can go home and eat. The rabbi, we'll call him that here because this is how almost everyone at this service perceives him, and we are, at least in part, what others perceive us to be. Isn't that so? Concludes Mincha, using for the final prayer, the Kaddish, a lively, rousing tune that he learned from a British friend. At the very end of this prayer, the congregation, which throughout Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur has been joining it at every appropriate moment, enthusiastically shouts out the final word, the Hebrew for amen. Amen! There is joy and camaraderie in the room, the euphoric esprit de corps that unites a sports team when it's doing well. Smiling, the rabbi says, soon we'll be starting Ne'ilah. So now take a few minutes for yourself for some private, personal reflection. If you wish, you can read some of the piyutim, the liturgical poems, in your machzor, El Nora Alila, for example, or look at the readings in the booklet, Thoughts for Yom Kippur. Alternatively, you can just be with yourself, with your own thoughts and meditations. This is some quiet time for you to be alone with your soul and reflect on the past year and the coming one. In 5 minutes, we'll begin Ne'ilah. Some quiet time for them, he thinks gratefully, collapsing into his seat on the makeshift stage, but also some quiet time for me. Now he'll have a few minutes to catch his breath, collect himself, and muster his strength, like an athlete preparing for the last and hardest stretch to the finish line. A dome of silence descends over the room. Earlier today, the congregation leapt at any opportunity to chatter among themselves. Now it looks like they are entering the deep work of self-examination, of facing or trying to face the real truth about themselves and their lives. Or maybe they are simply too tired after a day in shul for even desultory chit-chat. In any case, the silence here gets deeper and thicker, metamorphosing like a pea soup as it simmers. Meanwhile, a few people notice a little girl no more than 3 years old, wearing a red dress and with dark curly hair, standing alone in the middle of the gym, smack in the center of the main aisle, connecting the rabbi's seat at one end and the ark, which is actually an equipment locker, at the other. The girl stretches her arms out wide and begins to spin around, slowly at first, then faster and faster, twirling at top speed wildly, ecstatically, until she suddenly collapses in a laughing heap on the floor. People watch, mesmerized. Then her baby voice cuts through the silence, ringing out loud and clear, reaching up to the highest rafter and maybe even the heavens. Amen! People smile and laugh. Her mother, in a forest green dress, rushes over and scoops her up. So I'll stop here, and I hope you found this interesting. And now I think Cantor Paula is going to invite you all to, with any questions, comments, thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. So please don't.
Absolutely. I hope you're doing the audiobook for your, because I love listening to you read your own words. Amazing. So David Weiss, hello. You're the first one with a hand up.
Are you on mute?
There you go.
I was actually just applauding. I enjoyed it so much. So thank you so much, Nora, for your great rendition, your reading of those two lovely, lovely novellas. So thank you.
Welcome. Glad you liked it. Thank you.
Sandra Rabin.
Sandra, we can't hear you. Are you on mute?
It does not look like she is on mute, but perhaps the microphone she's using is not the one that's working. Sometimes that happens. Does anyone else in the meantime? Oh, Mark.
Nora, from Hinda and I, that was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We actually were wondering when you talked about the synagogue in the gym, whether you were talking about the Jewish People's School in Montreal, where
the reconstruction of
yeah.
synagogue started.
Oh, that's right. That's true. I know that, Shul, but no, actually, I'm talking about the gym at the JCC at Bloor and Spadina in Toronto, which still has services there in the gym. And that's where I went until last year for 20. Yeah.
Congratulations on you've been very productive, and thanks so much for sharing it with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Hinda. And it's interesting to hear that this isn't the only, Yom Kippur service in a gym. I think, there are a lot of attempts to provide services in less obvious or traditional contexts because there's so many Jews who are unaffiliated and want something alternative or, to make it as open as possible. So that's interesting to hear about the reconstruction of Shul in Montreal.
Because the other possibility I was wondering while you're reading it was whether it was the Song Shul, which doesn't have a building. And I don't know what their history is, whether at some point they were in a gym as well.
I don't know, but I think there are a lot of groups that don't have buildings.
I can tell you, Hinda, that Jordan and I led services in gyms, in the early 2000s as part of Kollel, the adult Jewish education place of which Rabbi Elise Goldstein was the director. And I would expect that City Shul would also be involved in some extra space kind of services. Rabbi Yossi Saperman today is running the new shul in Toronto, which is not a synagogue-based shul. And so high holiday services are in any kind of venue that they choose. So it really is like, when you think of it, the one time of year, if you're Jewish and you never go to services, you might go, probably will go to Yom Kippur. You don't belong to a synagogue. You're going to find one of the many possibilities of going. And I want to say, Nora, that your description of the rabbi's internality, the student, and the song use and the concern about strength and how they're being perceived, boy, that really, it's like you have an insight into the soul of Christian. It's very real. Thank you. Okay, Sandra is trying to get her sound working. So when we hear from her, that would be great. Someone else want to comment on one of the works or what you've heard today?
I'd like to thank Diane Schomperlin, who's here, because she was the first one who read these two novellas.
Truly lovely.
I don't know if you guys know, but she is a wonderful, very important Canadian writer and a winner of the Governor General's Award and a very eminent writer. And she encouraged me.
Thank you very much, Nora. It's always been a pleasure to give you a little assistance in your writing, and I'm especially thrilled that I love the split on this book between
Love
the
that
two.
too.
I mean, that is absolutely wonderful. So yes, it's always a pleasure to work with you and always a pleasure to hear you talk. And so I'm happy to be here today.
So glad you are, Diane.
Thank
Mark.
you.
Nora, the lady who was sick, how old was she in the book?
She's 45. She's in her sort of the center of her life, the prime of her life, if you will. Everything's going well for her. She has friends. She has a social life. She has a career that would be very successful if she weren't sick.
Because I was wondering about on medical this period of illness, and I first thought of esoteric things like tuberculosis, malaria, underlying malignancy. And then I'm wondering, I hate to say, well, sounds like menopause to me.
So it's a very interesting question. Because I could only read an excerpt, you don't know other things that are in the book, obviously. She's been through all the tests and they found nothing. She's been to every possible doctor. They've eliminated everything that they could think of. They have her sort of labeled as psychological because they haven't found anything, but it's not psychological, clearly. It's sort of in the realm of chronic fatigue syndrome, but she doesn't really fit with that either. So she's got this mysterious illness, and actually that is there's a whole field called the gray zone illness field. And in Toronto, there's, if you remember the TV show House, this brilliant doctor, right? There's a sort of house in Toronto named Ho Ping Kong, Dr. Ho Ping Kong, who was at Toronto Western. And he specialized in these illnesses. He only took people who had already seen everybody and had been given up on. And so that's a whole field. And in this novella, I touch on, or I don't know whether I would say deal with, but certainly it's a present point in the novel that she's a woman and a middle-aged woman and is treated as such. She's sometimes treated respectfully, but most of the time, all the doctors were male but one. And some of them were wonderful, but some of them treated her with, really it's in your head, women of your age, blah, blah, blah. So it's certainly not an anti-doctor, anti-medical book, but her struggle is one that is common to many women and not common to that many men. I should say also that I wrote this book long before COVID. It takes me a while always to find a publisher. People assume, oh, you did, it's coming out now. It has a COVID sense, but it had nothing to do with COVID. In fact, her symptoms are quite similar to what many people with long COVID experience, right? You're nodding and as a physician. I mean, they don't know what it is. They don't know how to solve it. They can't say, I don't know how many million people have it. You're all psychologically impaired. I mean, it's real. So she has something like that. And, that's sort of the framework for the book. And that illness triggers a lot of thoughts about her medical past, which isn't something she's usually thinking about. In fact, it's something she avoids. So this is a pivotal moment for her.
Thank you, Nora. Nora, a couple questions have been put in the chat, and I'd like to share them with you. One is from Moira Farr. She found your reading so moving, and she has a question. Could you talk about writing in the second person?
Oh, isn't that interesting? Well, that comes from Moira Farr, who's also a wonderful writer, journalist, and writing teacher in her own right, and writer of fiction too. When I'm asked questions about, the craft of writing, or questions about the writing itself, the truthful answer, unlike one that I could probably crib if I had known it in advance, but I wouldn't do that anyway, is that I don't really think about it when I'm doing it. At no point did I say, you see Diane nodding, at no point did I say, oh, wouldn't it be cute to change the person I'm writing in? Let me flip from first person, and the next page will be second person, and the next page will be third person, and isn't that cute? There may be writers, there probably are some writers who play in that way, and that doesn't mean that their works aren't fantastic, but I don't write that way. It just came out that way. I suppose I find something very intimate.
I'm just listening. What?
Sorry, we got some, there we go. Okay, continue, Nora, sorry.
Yeah, and to say again, I'm not criticizing that approach to writing. I'm just explaining that for me, that isn't relevant. I think writing in the second person is very intimate, and but it also has a built-in problem. Like if I write a sentence, you're so happy living in New York. Well, if you don't live in New York, that's a very alienating sentence. Who is the you that you're writing to, actually? So the you, in some ways, it's the individual you, not the plural you. So it's trying to connect to the reader at a very intimate level. It's different from we, obviously. Then it becomes about the writer and some unknown group. It happened that way. And then other parts were in the third person. And I think there are even some parts in the first person. And it was just, I think her flashbacks to her childhood were mostly in the first person. And I think we have multiple selves. I think the person who is narrating, and the person who is re-experiencing the past, and the person who is trying to juggle all her inner worlds are not exactly the same person. Moira, I don't know if I've answered the question to your satisfaction.
As she answers, yes, it does add intimacy. And I think it works so well when you're trying to convey what it's like to live with an illness of the kind you're describing. So,
yeah, and that's interesting, because when you say a sentence like, when you're sick, you're in a different country, immediately anybody who's never been sick can't relate, and you lose them in the first sentence of the novella, except who's never been sick. Now, I mean, some people, may have just had a cold and they haven't had this deep experience of illness. But I think most people either have been, unfortunately, ill themselves in a beyond cold way, or flu way, or know someone intimately, loves somebody who's sick in that way, and can enter into that framework.
There's a question from Deborah Ostrowski. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on your interesting observation regarding very few stories, if any, about Yom Kippur. Is there not a story by Agnon, Shlomo Agnon, Agnon? Do you suspect any reasons or have any ideas and theories about why?
Well, I was talking about fiction books,
Mm-hmm.
either novels or novellas. There are short stories, not dozens also. I really did find this perplexing, and I was asked by the Jewish Book Council in New York to write a blog about this, so I did. So that will come out at some point. That will come out next month or sooner. it's something I'd never noticed, and it really seems problematic to me. I mean, it's just too much of a coincidence. It feels like the topic is being avoided, and I wasn't really joking when I speculated on the reasons. I mean, it's, if you start writing about something, I suppose there are people who write in a very pious way, or a way where, well, but you can be pious and have fun. I don't know exactly the word pious, complicated word. I mean, I love our tradition and I love Yom Kippur, and the book is full of humor, as you heard even from what I read, and jokes and puns and challenges. And there's a scene in there where a woman gets up to lead, and there's a man who says, this is wrong, it can't be done, you don't have a woman. There's all sorts of stuff in there. But I think it's even for Jews, and I would obviously, fortunately or unfortunately, most Jews are not synagogue attending Jews. As you mentioned, Cantor Paula, there are many, many Jews who just show up for 3 days for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There may be a fear of doing it wrong, or of it relating to it really as a holy day, and you're afraid to touch it. I mean, I don't feel that way about anything Jewish. I feel it's ours, and it's as close to your heart as you want to make it. It's not something beyond us. It's not, as they say, it's not just in heaven, it's ours, whatever ever. But yeah, there's a real fear. There's no question there's fear. These are people who write about everything, who write about
Fascinating, isn't it?
sexual assault and
Yes.
community. Everything's okay, but not Yom Kippur.
Very
interesting. Yeah.
We've come to the end of our precious hour together. I just want to tell you how much I personally am looking forward to reading both of these works. I'm so excited. You have really stimulated my interest and grabbed my attention. I love your writing, Nora. It's really, really beautiful and intimate and engaging. I've put the link in the chat to all of you who may want to copy and paste that, where to find these books and how to find Nora Gold's website. Also remind you of jewishfiction.com, which I opened during the talk and just looked so fascinating. I also took a quick look at Rita Mendes Floor's amazing website in Israel, her incredible photography and work. What an eye you have, my dear. It is just gorgeous. I think she's maybe gone off now, but incredible work. And Diane, your writing as well. You have an amazing website and just a gorgeous presence, and look forward to exploring there as well. Moira as well. There are probably many other here who are writers, and obviously we have lots of literary fans here today too, including our own storyteller, Barry Viner, who's Barry Rosen. Sorry, I gave you Leslie's last name. Sorry about that, Barry. But that has to happen sometime, doesn't it? Thank you so much, Nora. This is a great event and a wonderful start, I hope, to these incredible works. So thank you so much for being with us. Thanks to all of you for coming out. This ends our 5 episodes of Breakfast Club until the spring, when we have some next generation breakfast clubs, which is our looking into and hearing from some of our younger people. By younger, they're 20s, 30s, but they're doing exciting things in the world, and they're studying amazing things. And we're going to hear about their works and their passions. So exciting. So thank you, Nora, so much.
Thank you. You've been delightful to host me and have me. And thank you all. This has been a very emotional and important.
Beautiful, beautiful connection with you, Nora.
So,
And Nora, everyone. Be well.
bye-bye, Nora. Great to see you.
Thank you.
That's good.